Hey everybody, it's Dr. Cody Rull with Techforpsych. Today we have Dr. Graeme Moffat, Chief of Research at Interaxon, the company that makes the Muse Headband. Both Graeme and the company have been through a lot since we last had him on Techforpsych, so we had a ton to talk about. They've literally been all over the world talking about educating and improving on this technology. We took a look at the Muse 2 hardware, the software of the Muse meditation app, machine learning, some independent high-profile research projects that are going on with the Muse. We took a look at the super secret Muse Soft Headband that Interaxon is developing for sleep tracking, as well as taking a look at some very near future applications of EEG for virtual and augmented reality. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to help support the channel and bring experts like Dr. Moffat on to talk about neurotechnology so that we can all learn. Thanks so much. Let's jump into the interview. Hey, it's Dr. Cody Rull with Techforpsych. I've got Dr. Graeme Moffat here, Chief of Research at Interaxon. Graeme, thanks so much for being on. I know you're busy. You know, you've done so much since we last talked. You've been all over the country talking about the Muse, and most recently you guys have put out Muse 2, so it's awesome just to have you on the channel and talking about everything that you and Interaxon are doing. I guess if you could just jump into, a little bit about what you've been up to and talk about the Muse 2, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. It's and thanks for having me on again. It's always fun to chat and catch up on where you're sort of at the top of the game of tech for psychology and mental health. So it's a pleasure to speak with you and an honor to be invited back onto the program. So we've been pretty busy at Muse for the last I would say since indefinitely really. And we've been traveling not just all over the country, but all over the world, really. So I think neurotechnology is picking up everywhere. I was at a workshop in China, and the NIH and the FDA were there, and on neurotechnology and ethical priorities for neurotechnology, hosted by the OECD. So people are thinking hard about what neurotechnology means for mental health and what it means for public mental health, especially, and technology in general, but specifically neurotechnology, now that we're seeing sort of widespread adoption of consumer scale neurotech. So in terms of what we've been up to here at Muse, there's been a lot of active research. We've been doing quite a bit of collaboration with research partners around the world. We've seen really big uptake both by the clinical mental health community for the meditation tool aspect of Muse, meditation learning aspect. There are people using Muse for sort of classical neurofeedback paradigms like MindLift for a variety of indications that, depending on whether or not neurofeedback is a suitable treatment, Muse can actually work for some elements of neurofeedback, even as a sparse EEG system. So for us, the big news has been Muse 2. So this is we launched Muse 2 in the beginning of November 2018, so about 5 months ago now. And it's been received very well by the community, both established Muse users and new Muse users alike. I think the big changes were just we added a few features and we improved on all of the things that we wanted to improve on from the Muse form factor and some of the electronics and technology that we've had in there for a few years. So all the lessons learned, all the improvements that we wanted to make, we built in, and we added some new experiences in the app for both neurofeedback and biofeedback. So sort of classical cardiac and respiratory biofeedback, movement biofeedback. And we added a PPG in the sensors. So this is a photoplethysmograph. This is the kind of thing you see on an Apple Watch or on a Fitbit or Garmin or whatever. This is the thing that reads your pulse. And it actually does that by reading just sort of the mechanical wave and the flow of blood through the arteries in the systemic circulation. So it turns out that a great place to read pulse is actually right up here on the forehead, because you get lots of blood to your heads.
Yeah, I've got my Muse 2 here. I noticed that the electrodes on the front are a different color than the original Muse. And it's slimmer as well. I was curious about any other materials that you guys potentially use in the newer one that is different than the last, or is where.
In most cases we stuck with what worked.
Sure.
But we've learned a little bit about material science in the last 4 or 5 years. We tried some slightly different materials in the Smith EEG glasses, and we learned a little bit from that. And then, so this is just sort of a next iteration. One of the things we did was we changed the electrode material on the frontal electrodes from silver to gold. It has some basic characteristics and properties that give gold a little bit of an advantage in terms of durability and biosignal bioimpedance. So it's not a big change. It's not a material change in terms of what Muse is made of. It's definitely a lot lighter. It's sort of, you can carry it around. It's a lot less bulky than the 2016 Muse and the 2014 Muse, but still very much the same form factor because it works. And people have gotten used to it now, and it's easy to put on. And because it works, we're not going to break the thing that works. So yeah, we're still working on some of the firmware updates that we'll want to enable researchers to do the sort of full gamut of all of the work that they want to do with Muse 2. But it's been very well received, and we're encouraged by how people have used it. So one of the things that's been most popular has been the heart biofeedback. So we created this really neat auditory environment where we actually went out and recorded some drummers, a variety of different types of drums, like frame drums, Native American frame drums, and some other things. And we play people's heartbeats back to them as a drum beat. And that's sort of in an auditory environment, much like the Muse auditory environment. So it's a really nice soundscape. And you can actually hear, when you play somebody, it's actually surprising. It was even surprising to me the extent to which just respiration accelerates and decelerates the heartbeat. When you play it back to yourself, you can really feel when your auditory system is listening to it, as opposed to sort of sensing it. You can really feel and hear the acceleration as you inhale, and then the deceleration as you exhale, and the sinus arrhythmia. And that people not only like that, but that's a really good way to teach deep breathing and to sort of introduce people to breathing exercises. So the whole framework we built out with Muse 2 was, we decided, okay, we've learned a lot about how people use the Muse technology when they're learning to meditate and trying to focus. And we realized that along the way, we had to actually put in a pretty strong pedagogical framework around that to teach meditation and to give people insight into meditation alongside the feedback. And what we've done now is, with Muse 2, we have a movement-based biofeedback. So we want to teach people how to sit relatively still. That's, sort of an initial step to, how do I sit? And, is my posture right? Am I swaying too much? Am I swaying too little? Am I fidgeting? Then we teach people how to breathe with the breathing biofeedback, which is based both on movement and on cardiac sinus arrhythmia. And then we teach people how to listen to their heartbeats, which is a pretty powerful way to teach them interoception, so how to feel their bodies and how to be in their bodies. And interoception is, if you can believe it, is actually a pretty strong correlate of some personality characteristics like emotionality and emotion regulation. There are all kinds of correlates if you look at the literature on interoception. So how do we sense our own bodies? What you see is that the classic task for this is, or the classic psychometric task, experimental task, is count your heartbeats for like 30 seconds or a minute. And so you go and count your heartbeats, and then if you're accurate to within 2 heartbeats, you're considered accurate, and if you're not, you're considered. This is just sort of a dichotomy for statistical purposes, but it turns out that the better you are at that, the better you are in many respects at self-regulation. If we can train that, and we're hopeful that we can, we can make people a little bit better at sensing their own bodies, then that's a really powerful tool, in addition to the mind meditation with Muse, the sort of classic mind meditation, which we haven't changed too much. The audio environment has changed a little bit. We've added some features, but by and large, the mind meditation is still the same, and that's measuring mind wandering and giving people real-time feedback when their mind wanders away from a focused and relaxed state. And the auditory cues come in to then sort of tell them, okay, now you have to bring your attention back to your breath. So first sit, then breathe, then listen to your body, then listen to your mind, and work on your focus.
Makes total sense to me as a mental health provider, because people just have very little awareness sometimes of where not only their mind is at, but where their body is at as well. So it just makes total sense to incorporate these different biosensors into one suite that you have there to learn more about your mind and your body. I think it works really well. And the software has obviously undergone sort of a makeover as well. I know I read that you guys had brought on some additional people or another company to really design a lot of the software to make it visually even more engaging. Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, actually, so it was Meditation Studio, which was one of the top 5 apps for meditation in the iOS App Store. It's a fantastic group of people from Denver, from around sort of Denver, Boulder area in Colorado, and they're still there. So there's now a second Muse office down in Colorado, which is really nice to go and visit. But also, they're just fantastic people to work with. And so Meditation Studio has probably about 500 or 600 different meditations in their app. They have introductory courses of 10 or 12 lessons, and then meditations for different things like stress and going to sleep and those kinds of things. There's a wide variety, even getting into veterans and PTSD and those kinds of things. So meditation is pretty widely used, I think, in psychotherapy, and having these course packs and this isn't just Meditation Studio, Headspace and Calm have this, but one of the reasons that we brought in Meditation Studio was that there was a real demand from the Muse user base and from practitioners like you to have sort of a broader range of content around in meditation that could be incorporated into the Muse experience. And that's what's coming next. So we're now testing in beta guided meditations alongside the Muse experience. So initially it'll be course packs within Muse that you'll turn off the soundscape and you'll just do a guided meditation, and you get your score at the end of the session. And then that will become more dynamic as time goes on. So it's been a really interesting journey, not just in the revamp and redesign of the app and the experiences, but also in bringing in all of these different teachers to add value and insight into meditation alongside the Muse experience. So there have been some great teachers who helped us design and record the courses for the new experiences like heart and breath and body in the Muse app as well.
Yeah, it's one thing to take a look at the device and just see the simplicity of design, but then also to learn more about like what's under the hood and how much work you guys have put into creating the experience, creating the algorithms, the machine learning and other high-end tech behind it. And I've heard quite a few of your talks lately on YouTube, and I love one of the central themes seems to be you're collecting all this data. You've really democratized this ability to collect a lot of brain data, and a lot of interesting findings have come out of that. And then also other groups sort of branching out and taking on their own research projects and really contributing to neuroscience in a way that's never been done before. Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, it's that's one of the most exciting parts of what we do here at Muse is the sort of discovering neuroscience. So people who try Muse out will know that they can look back on their sessions over. So if you do multiple sessions, you can do a week of sessions. You can look back over your week and you can see how you did in each session. You can dive into it. That's because your data is saved in a sort of a cloud server, a highly secure cloud server. And we allow you to go back and look at that. And everybody owns their own data. So, and when somebody says, delete my account, I don't want my data in there, it's gone. So it's total ownership by the individual user. And that we think is really, really important because, now everybody's finally sort of woken up to the issues around privacy and personal information. We were very cognizant of this from the early days because people are rightly concerned about what you're doing with their brain data in the same way that they're concerned about, their genetic data. There's not a lot hiding in the EEG today that you can use as personally identifiable information. You can't read people's thoughts or anything, but it is somebody's personal data. So we make sure that people know that they own their data and who has access to it, and we only use it for improving the experience for those individual users. But there's another level of research that goes on through the app, and if you've gone through a couple of sessions, you'll get a prompt to go or to ask if you'd be interested in joining our research program. And probably about 65% of Muse users will sign up for that. And what that means is that we extract out all of your personal information, and in highly circumscribed and supervised ways, we collaborate with university-based researchers under ethics approval by those universities' boards research boards, and we'll dig in for insights from the data. So we can not only build new experiences in Muse based on a large number of users' data and seeing, how people's brains change with age and how they change by time of day, and those effects are all in there. Like there are time of day effects in EEG, there are time of year effects, seasonal effects. Wow. There are age effects, there are gender effects, and we're getting better and better, I think, thanks in large part to some of the sort of leading edge research coming out of some of the universities in the US and Canada on EEG signal processing. So there's some exciting stuff going on in the big data analysis that we've been working on. We've been very fortunate to work with some really, really bright graduate students and professors from UCSD who've sort of developed new tools for analyzing EEG. And when we apply them to our big data set, which I think is the biggest EEG data set in the world, we get this incredibly rich and deep insight because we can see, so many data points, and we can look across the entire life course from 18-year-olds to 92-year-olds and say, how does the brain change with age when we use these new tools? And all kinds of interesting things fall out. So we have a couple of papers coming out on that. We've published a couple in the past, and now we're improving the tools and diving deeper for more insights. And the reason we do that is it contributes a lot to our understanding of the brain, and we're hopeful that it will lead to, not just through Muse, but through through university-based research or others, that it leads to better insight into brain health and new tools for brain health. I think we all sort of recognize that we need better tools for brain and mental health, and to be able to contribute a small part to that through research on data that Muse users share with us is really valuable and special. And so we really do appreciate when people share their data as part of the research program, because it really does produce novel insights into brain health.
I think people appreciate just being a part of the process too. If you get on Facebook and you've got the Muse community, people are just showing their brain waves, and there's an open discussion about what this means, and it's just so cool to see all these people coming together, try to learn along with the company about what's going on with the brain and what the EEG actually means.
That's right, absolutely. And one of the things we're hoping to do this year is to get the research community, the EEG research community, more engaged with the Muse enthusiast community, so that we can bring some more experiments to that group. Bring in some sort of hardcore cognitive science and EEG science, and help people understand a little bit better what they're looking at when they're looking at their brainwaves, and give the neuroscience research community access to that enthusiast group, because there are hundreds or thousands of people who are really enthusiastic about digging into their brainwaves and using third-party apps like or some of the Muse apps like Muse Direct for iOS to record their data and visualize it, or Muse Monitor, or some of the other ones, some of the open source ones like Muse LSL. So there are a variety of tools out there now that have been built by app developers in the research community for diving into your brainwaves. And they're getting better and better. And even really sort of introductory level things like EEG 101 is a really powerful tool. So I don't know if you've probably encountered EEG 101 before, but it's this incredible tool that was built by really a group of students and enthusiasts here in Toronto, and connects to Muse, and then goes through like a course on what is EEG, how are the signals processed, what do the signals mean, and you can sort of this is a free app, which is incredible, and it's now being used in universities across North America for education and in hackathons to bring people on board to how do I build a brainwave app or a brainwave tool. It's a really powerful, there's a powerful now, I think, ecosystem of tools from Muse that allow people to go beyond the sort of meditation experience as well.
Yeah, so many videos that I want to make, both on EEG 101, and then also I agree that the ecosystem that's just forming around the platform, whether you want to learn or do research or meditate, it's just all kind of coming together. And I love the idea of, I love the leadership that you guys are doing of talking about doing cognitive tasks with the general consumer, and also the ethics that come into trying to use that data to inform neuroscience, whereas before you would have had very strict conditions in a laboratory setting, but very few subjects. What's the role of having a little looser constraints, but also having just a huge amount of big data that makes it very powerful powerful data at the same time?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because when we first came along, one of the questions that arose was, how can this possibly be EEG? It only costs $250. It can't work like $100,000 EEG system, and the answer to that was, well, it's not the same thing. These are complementary technologies. $100,000 system, you're going to use that for research or clinical applications, and it's going to take you an hour to set up, and then you're going to do an hour of testing. You can't really force a kid to sit still, or you can't really, if somebody, like even a university student doesn't really want to sit still. So it's just a different technology for different kinds of experimentation. And when we dug into the data, what we realized is it's actually, with a sparse EEG system like Muse, you can train somebody to put this thing on, and you can teach them how to get signal quality. And then you've got a lot of data coming from a lot of people. And because the technology is so highly standardized, the data quality is relatively standardized as well. So everybody's using exactly the same system, and they're getting exactly the same electrode locations. We have some demographic information about them if they've shared that with us through the research program. So there's real value in, I think, in both kinds of research. We're very lucky to be in Toronto, where there's a great big neuroscience research community. And just 2 days ago, we hosted a big neuroinformatics community in Toronto and around the world, came to town and hosted a big workshop on industry and academia collaboration in like large scale neurodata, everything from MRI to single cell data to EEG data. And one of the things that popped out there was that it's actually, because in every laboratory where you're doing an EEG experiment in a classical sort of laboratory setting, you've got different experimenters. You've often just trained up an experimenter who's an undergraduate student. And so you've different experimenters in the same experiment, and you've got different setups in one lab to the next. So it's actually very difficult to compare high density EEG data between labs. And that's a challenge. So standardizing those practices across laboratories is a challenge. We can sort of bootstrap our way past that by having everybody do the same thing with our technology. It's in a sparse setting. So it's a question of where you get the power for your data analysis. One way is you can get a lot of data, very high density, from a few subjects. Another is you can get a lot of data, low or sparse density, from a huge number of subjects and from repeated measures on those subjects. So instead of, one time at the beginning of an experiment, and if it's a longitudinal one time at the end, you've got daily measures from people who are using the Muse every day and who are willing to do some of these cognitive tasks. So, we have some users who've done like 12 sessions, maybe even more. Some people, a session every single day. So for 4 years. So to have 4 years of daily EEG from people is an incredibly rich, even as a single case study, is an incredibly rich data set. It really tells us about the stability of some metrics over time, and where to look for the signal in the noise, and how to build experiences on that, and even how to look for how the brain changes with meditation and with age.
And I've heard from some of you guys' previous talks, one that you did at Exponential Medicine, talking about even being able to customize in the near future of off of people's individual brainwave data, or like their age or gender, these different things that make the EEG different. And I know a lot of this information kind of goes into your guys' algorithm, and you can't talk freely about everything, but as much as you could talk about like how the calibration works and what that data collected does for the meditation itself, and where you guys are headed with that technology would be really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're always looking for ways to improve the experience and to make it a little bit more stable. One of the things that, and there's no point in sort of hiding this, is that you have to get the Muse to fit on your head effectively, and you have to calibrate every day. And you have to sort of sit for 60 seconds and let your mind wander, and then go into your meditation, and that gives us the comparator. So you have a baseline to a meditative state. And if we get the comparator baseline wrong, then in that session may not work as well as some of the other sessions. So you may end up miscalibrated, and then like you're getting all birds all the time, or no birds at all. And so that's a source of instability and noise in the way that Muse works that we're working to stabilize. So one way we can do it is look over multiple sessions, and we can build that sort of calibration based not on a single day but on multiple days, and start you out a little faster. The other thing is that with dry EEG, it's not quite the same as saline or wet EEG or gel EEG. So if you're putting on an EEG system like you would in a neurofeedback clinic or in a university laboratory, you've got somebody who's applying gel or saline solution, and it takes a while to set up, but in the process of setting it up, not only are you getting that sort of like very strong low impedance connection from all of the conductive gel or the saline solution, but it's got time to settle during the hour that you're setting up. With a dry EEG system, there's a settling time for signal quality. So the first couple of minutes you've got something on your head, the signal quality is still changing, because what happens is a little bit of sweat builds up between the skin and the electrodes, and that becomes sort of a buffer conductor that improves the signal quality. So what we see is for the first couple of minutes, the signal quality is still improving, and then it stabilizes. And so one of the things that we're working on ways to get around this and to build that sort of stabilization process into the experience. But people can really improve their experiences by just putting the Muse on for a couple minutes before they even start the app, and then they've got they may have a more stable experience. So those kinds of things, looking at multiple sessions and seeing how these signal quality changes, and looking back over a history of sessions for an individual user, say like the last 2 weeks, and looking at how their brains changed, allows us to improve the experiences. So that's one way we use machine learning. And the other one is to just dive in and look for new experiences, and look for things in there that like brain age that we can try to sort of give people feedback. Is this is what your brain looks like as compared to your age group. So we know that a 60-year-old brain typically has let's say you can pick a characteristic feature of EEG, let's say the alpha center oscillation frequency, and that slows with age. So for a 60-year-old, it might be like 9 hertz, 9 cycles per second. And for a 20-year-old, it's like 11 or 12. And so we can say, relative to people within your cohort, here's where your brain is. You might be your brain might look a little older than average or a little younger than average, and that might vary from day to day too. Some features of the EEG are highly stable, and some are quite unstable, and they vary day to day. So it's a little bit like circadian biology. Some people are going to sleep 5 hours a night, and that's enough for them, and some are going to need 8. But individual variation, you'll have good nights of sleep and bad nights of sleep. Having that insight as to what sort of optimizes whether it's your experience of meditation or your sleep or your diet, that kind of information we're hoping is really powerful in helping people to improve both their brain health and their mental health and their experience of sort of everyday meditation. And
one of the other things it sounds like people are looking at is ERPs, or evoke related potentials, and their role in showing things about brain health. Could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, this is a fascinating area. So starting in the 60s or 70s, people started looking at time locked events. So if we play a stimulus for you, what happens in the brain? And what was discovered was there's something called an event-related potential. It's very different from the continuous oscillating EEG. So there's continuous EEG, which is all of the waves superimposed upon one another and some noise and everything else. And then if you play a stimulus event, and that can be an auditory, like something as simple as a tone or a flash of light, we see this characteristic deflection, and it depends on what the stimulus is. So the wave, and it's hidden in the background noise. So you have to do this repeatedly. You do it 10 or 100 or 1,000 times, and then you average over the onset of the stimulus, and you see this characteristic wave. And the sort of early effects that are related to sensory processing, so they're like lower levels of the brain, and then the brainstem or midbrain, and then mid latency potentials, which are neuroplastic, so they're susceptible to training. We see this in musicians. So for where a good example is where my thesis advisor did a bunch of work on neuroplasticity in the learning of music. And what you see is if you play a trumpet tone to a trumpet player, you get a bigger response than you do to a violin player. And if you play a violin tone, you get a bigger response in the violin player. So these things are susceptible to training in neuroplasticity. And then after that, you start to see things like the P3 and the N4, which are considered, cognitively penetrable, meaning that these are the cognitive processes that are susceptible to attention and memory and all kinds of things like that, recognition. And there are all kinds. There's a whole character. There's a huge kind of list of evoked potentials or event-related potentials that are characteristic of different parts of the brain, and we know where they come from because we have this sort of rich body of neuroscience where people have been experimenting and localizing these things for decades now. Right. The big revolution is being able to do this in a sparse EEG system, which was what was shown by Professor Craig Olson's lab at the University of Victoria. And so he's done some attention tasks, some basic things like they flash a blue light, and then every now and then it gets a green light, and they ask you to count the number of green flashes. Mm-hmm. And so you see this attention effect in the green flashes, where there's a much bigger brain response to that, and that's a sort of a proxy measure for whether or not someone is vigilant to a task. If they're trying at the task, they're paying attention, then you see a bigger response. And this is affected by fatigue. It's affected by whether you've had caffeine. It's affected by whether you've had alcohol or some sort of central nervous system depressant or stimulant. So these things are, and it even is potentially affected by concussion and things like that. So if you can get a baseline measure and then you can go and look at somebody's brain after some sort of perturbation to the brain, then you've got a powerful way of looking at, what has changed between before and now, if there was some sort of event, whether it was traumatic or otherwise in between. So it's a really powerful way, not only of looking at brain function at a sort of fine-grained level, but also of looking at changes in neuroplasticity. And we see, if you look at some of the literature, some of the people who've worked on the Muse meditation app, who've gone and looked at what are the consequences of meditating with Muse for 4 weeks. There's a really good group in Italy. Michela Balconi has a lab there at the Catholic University of Milan, where they've had people meditate with Muse for 20 minutes a day for 4 weeks. And what they see is an amplification of the P3 response. So at the 300 milliseconds after this stimulus onset, in a task where people are asked to be vigilant, in the meditators group as compared to controls had a sort of a bigger response, which suggests that something has happened in their cognition. They might be better able to be vigilant during this task. There's a lot of explanations for that, but one of them is that people get a little bit better at paying attention, and you see that reflected in the neurophysiology data, which is pretty exciting.
I think not only the EEG community, but also just such wide-reaching implications here in sports psychology and other areas to sort of open the floodgates and people that are actually interested in this technology. Because as soon as you can measure how people's brains are doing and give them feedback, I've just seen on YouTube people ask about that again and again, and I think that's just such a exciting area, to be moving into.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're heading toward that. Is at some point in the not too distant future, we'll have pretty robust and well established and tested, and a variety of different versions of like a brain score. Where you can do a basic task every day for a couple of minutes with an EEG system on your head, with a Muse on your head, and we'll give you a score that day. And this is sort of what Professor Craig Olson's company Suva has done with the Aspire app. You can do a task every day. It's a pretty boring task right now, but it eventually gets more interesting as you start to work with game designers on these things and make it into a more engaging experience. And you'll get a score at the beginning of your day every day, and it'll tell you in the same way that the Oura Ring gives you a readiness score at the beginning of the day based on your sleep. We'll be able to tell you, you either need more sleep or maybe have that second coffee before you try to do anything really smart today because your P300 latency is a little off and your amplitude is a little off. And we'll get better and better. So we'll see more and more powerful tools for this. and they'll be practical is the key thing. This is this isn't science fiction. There's nothing magical here. We've known about event related potentials for a long time. It's just a question of having a technology that allows us to take them out of the lab at scale and to make them practically usable.
Yeah, I'm touching base with Suva soon, and I can't wait to learn more about what they're up to, and having them on the channel as well. But yeah, speaking of sleep, you guys have a new venture coming up. I think it was announced at CES this year, the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. Would you mind showing us the Softband?
Yeah, so this is a prototype version of a next generation Muse.
Very cool.
This is, you can see the sort of classic Muse electrode configuration here and the ear electrodes there. And we haven't finalized the design yet, but it's going to be a soft textile version of Muse. And the electronics will sit in a little pocket, and they'll be detachable, and so take them out and recharge them. It's going to be, initially, this is going to do the same thing that Muse does. It's going to do, you'll be able to use it for research, you'll be able to use it for meditation. And then as we get closer to the end of the year, or sort of early 2020, we'll start to roll out some new features in beta and try to figure out how we can measure much longer periods of time for EEG. So one of the big targets for EEG, and one of the things it's most commonly used for, is the measurement of sleep. And there are commercial devices out there that already do this. Dream is one of them. Mm-hmm. Philips just launched the Smart Sleep headband, and so there are a variety of reasons you want to measure sleep, and it's really, it goes from everything just kind of from scoring sleep for interest's sake, which is kind of what Fitbit and the Apple, what we think the Apple Watch is eventually going to do, and the Oura Ring, to give people insight into how they're sleeping. EEG is really the only way to distinguish all the different stages of sleep, from like N1, N2, N3, REM, light sleep, because there are characteristics that are not really observable behaviorally or in cardiac data that you can sort of see in the characteristics of the brainwaves, whether or not you've got more spindles or fewer spindles, or in slow wave sleep or not. So that's a really promising avenue, I think, and a lot of people are excited about sort of getting some insight from that. So we're going to be asking our early adopters and some of our enthusiasts in the user base. We'll be engaging the Muse community on this to participate in testing and improving and proving out this new form factor and these new products. So it's not going to arrive very soon. People shouldn't hold off on buying a Muse 2, because this isn't coming for like another some amount of time. Mm-hmm. But when it does come, we're really hopeful that this is going to open up some new avenues to new applications with EEG beyond just meditation and experimentation and brain scoring.
Sounds fun, and I love that you guys are opening it up to the community and getting people involved. Yeah,
it's a better way to develop products, and to to figure out how people use something and what they like about it. When we first started out with Muse, we had our ideas about what the features were going to be that people really latched onto, and we got some right, and some were things that we didn't anticipate. They were sort of second afterthoughts to us that the community really liked and really latched onto. So I think designing and building products with an enthusiast community in mind, and getting feedback on those things as they're going, as they're being iterated, is definitely the way to do things. You can end up with some pretty, there's a sort of a graveyard of EEG devices out there that got their start and never really got off the ground. And part of it is because the user experience design and user experience research and feedback from early users wasn't necessarily incorporated into early enough into the design process. And so you got some really hideous things, some really uncomfortable things. And, those are the things you have to solve first. Before you put the fancy technical things into an EEG system. It's like, is somebody going to wear this? Right. Is it comfortable? Are they getting something from it? And I think if you solve those things, then you can the rest of things, the things you can sort of will fall into place, and you can work on those after you've got a comfortable EEG system that's portable and easy to use.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on virtual and augmented reality? Because I know people have been looking at incorporating EEG into those experiences as well. How far along do you think it is, and do you think we could be seeing things in a couple of years with that?
I mean, we're seeing things now. So there's a market leader out there, Neurable. I don't know if you've talked to Ramses from Neurable, but they have so Neurable is primarily software focused, but they've worked with one of the big EEG manufacturers who does great work, actually a San Diego-based one, to make a sort of an HTC Vive incorporated. So this is a headset that has EEG built into it that attaches to the Vive faceplate. And they've got a game that works. You know, this is technology that is it's sort of neuroadaptive passive brain computer interface, and they have a variety of different technologies built in there, but it's an engaging and it's a cool experience, and it's quite a comfortable headset. So I don't think this is in the realm of like science fiction anymore. We're there. It's just a question of how fast we can bring the cost down, and how quickly we can get these kinds of tools into the hands of enough developers that there's a critical mass, and then also how do we teach game developers to work with neuroscientists to build engaging experiences, engaging VR experiences.
Yeah, from a mental health provider perspective, I can think of a couple of different utilities for VR, EEG for therapeutic techniques as well, where you have exposure.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Exposure therapy for PTSD and other treatments like it. So it's exciting to watch that as well.
Yeah, and not just I'd say not just EEG either. So you have the head is a great place to measure biosignals, not just EEG but cardiac biosignals. Sorry, I'm just if your group guys trying to sneak into the room on me. Cardiac biosignals and movement-based biosignals and temperature and galvanic skin response. So you can build a lot of with the real estate on the head that you have in an HTC or even a Microsoft HoloLens. You've got a lot of contact points on the head where you can put biosensors. There's no reason why you couldn't use nearly everywhere that one of these things touches the head. You couldn't use that material as a biosensor for either EEG or galvanic skin response, and you could be measuring emotional valence and response in the stimulant, the VR environment.
Well, it's all so exciting, and the field is exploding, and it's so awesome to have an expert such as yourself on. And I really have enjoyed watching your talks that you've given over the last year or two. But
thanks very much. It's always a pleasure to talk.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for being on, and I look forward to what you guys are doing in the future, and hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Anytime. We're always happy to chat, and thanks for being a fan of Muse and for educating the community about neurotech. This is an essential element, I think, of really getting the word out and explaining how the technology works to mental health practitioners and professionals, and to the community of enthusiasts as well. So thanks again.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's just so awesome to bring people into understanding their brains and their mind, and you guys have created the tool to do it. So thanks again, Graeme.